Welcome back, everybody. Hope everyone is doing well. My name is Jason. I'll be your host on this CFL talk show, Hussey's Huddle. In this video, we're going to recap Week 4 of the 2022 CFL season. But really quickly before we get started, if you want to support the channel, as always, be sure to hit like and subscribe. I really appreciate it, everybody. And with that said, let's recap Week 4. So first off, guys, I just wanted to apologize for getting this out a little bit later than I normally would. Just dealing with a little bit of a sickness right now that's kind of lingering still. But with that said, let's just get on with today's recap, starting with our first game, which was BC beating the Ottawa Redblacks on Thursday night, 34-31. And I'm just going to go and do a quick takeaway for each team since I'm getting this out a little bit later. Don't know how many people are actually going to be watching because they're probably turning their attention on to the next week already. So for BC, my main takeaway for this game is that Nathan Rourke faced adversity and he overcame it. And honestly, I think this was more of an impressive performance than we saw the first couple of weeks from BC, because the first couple of weeks for BC, they were unchallenged, really. They just had everything go right for them from the jump in both of those games. And now in that game against Ottawa, he threw a couple of interceptions within a handful of pass attempts, and he had to respond to that, and he did. So I think that is a great sign going forward, just showing that Nathan Rourke can handle that kind of adversity. And I also wanted to mention that this defense is really shaping up to be one of the best in the entire CFL. It's right up there in that conversation. The defensive line has been a lot better than I expected it to be, and that back end of that defense has been excellent, as I did expect them to be. So I was very impressed by BC in this game. And then for Ottawa, I think there were a lot of positive signs you could take away, but I think this was just your classic Jeremiah Masoli bad game. This is usually what you're going to see when he struggles. He's not the guy that's going to throw a bunch of turnovers or, make a whole bunch of terrible decisions, but I think just the accuracy, I think he was around a 50% completion percentage in this one, and I think that is, what you're going to expect when he has a bad game. This is what he showed last year in Hamilton as well. So I'm not too concerned about Masoli, but just this is a game you're going to get from him every once in a while. And I'll also add that the defensive breakdowns is really what cost Ottawa the game. That huge defensive breakdown that gave Keon Hatcher that 80-yard touchdown, that was huge in this game. And ultimately, I think that's what cost Ottawa in this game. Now for our second game of the week, which was Hamilton losing to the Edmonton Elks by a score of 29-25, blowing another lead. And starting with Hamilton, first of all, I'm not going to go too in-depth with them here because I made a dedicated video about it on the weekend. But I will say they must win soon or else jobs will be lost in this organization. There's just no excuse for a team that has this much talent and expectations is 0-4 at this point of the season. So there is a sense of urgency now in Tiger Town after just another dreadful collapse. And then on the Elks side of thing, I thought Trey Ford really opened up their playbook. You could just see the difference is when they had Nick Arbuckle versus when they had Ford in for this game. You just saw when they roll out, the defense has to respect, and it's really going to change the way that defenses have to defend the Elks going forward. Obviously, I think there's some limitations in terms of what you can execute in the passing game right now as Trey Ford adapts and, obviously gets accustomed to playing at the pro level. But I think those athletic tools are going to give him the opportunity to learn and, allow him to make plays while he's still, making mistakes here as a young passer. So very interested to see how he plays going forward. But I thought that the switch did the trick, and I think going forward that he is going to be the starter for the Elks. And I think also that their defense is steadily improving. We're starting to see Chris Jones work his magic a little bit, and we'll see if that continues in the following weeks here. Then on Saturday night, we had the Saskatchewan Roughriders bouncing back with a 41-20 victory over the Montreal Alouettes. Montreal actually led at halftime in this one, just had a brutal third quarter. And we'll start with them here, and I think the big problem with this team, and this is dating back to last year, even back to 2019, is that this team may just be too undisciplined. We saw just so many stupid penalties. Michael Wakefield got ejected from this game for back-to-back personal conduct penalties. Just stuff like that just has plagued the Alouettes the last couple of years. I think they had like 150 yards in total penalties, which you just can't have in the CFL if you expect to win. And honestly, I just not too concerned other than that for the Alouettes, just because I expected them to, get their asses kicked in the rematch here against Saskatchewan, but I think that is just a concern going forward, is that this team cannot stay out of its own way, and we've seen that the first couple of weeks of the season, just too many costly mistakes with penalties and situational stuff, like obviously the missed field goal back in week 2 against Toronto as well. So this team should have a better record than it does, but right now they sit at 1-3 and, right in the thick of things in the East Division. And lastly, on the quarterback front, I do expect Trevor Harris to remain this team starter after their bye week. I just think that this was a predictable game for him to struggle. Obviously, he had a couple of really bad turnovers, which, you don't like to see, but playing the same opponent back-to-back weeks, I think it was, pretty expected in my eyes that he was going to struggle. And I think that, making the switch back to Vernon Adams so soon, even though I do think we're going to see it, I think it's a little bit too soon. You can't just be changing the style of your offense every week, especially with how Adams and Harris are very dichotomous in terms of skill set. So I do think Trevor Harris is going to start for the Alouettes after the bye week. And then on the Saskatchewan side of things, I think the main thing I take away from this game is that home field advantage is still just so prevalent, and I think that defensive line really just fed off that home crowd early in this game and really played like we saw them play the first couple of weeks, and not like they played the first time they played Montreal. So I thought that was a really good sign for Saskatchewan. And then also keeping an eye on their injury situation. Cody Fajardo took a little bit of a low hit to the knee, and he stayed in the game, but he was obviously bothering him out there. And it's going to be very interesting to see how that affects his mobility going forward. They like to run a lot of stuff with him on the move, bootleg stuff. So it's going to be very interesting to see how it affects their offensive game plan next week against Ottawa. But I think ultimately he stayed in the game. He's a very tough guy. He's not going to take himself out of the game. So I was concerned when he got hit that he was going to, potentially injure himself even more. But ultimately he stayed in the game, and he looked like he shook it off towards the end of the game there. So we'll see how that affects Fajardo going forward. And then finally, wanted to mention, we actually got good Nick Marshall in this game. Obviously, the excellent interception return, but I think he has looked pretty good to start the season. Obviously, going to give up the odd deep ball here or there, but ultimately shows why, when he's at his best, he is one of the best defensive backs in the CFL. And then finally, the last game of the week, which was the Toronto Argonauts and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, with Winnipeg just barely squeaking out a victory 23-22 on a missed Boris Beatty extra point. And where do you begin with this game? We'll start with Toronto first of all, and I think it was the mistakes in the first half that really doomed them. They had a Brandon Banks dropped pass, and Brandon Banks, otherwise, I'll give him credit, he actually did play very well in this game, but he did make that mistake, and then the next play was a pick six for Winnipeg, so that was a huge swing early in this game that gave the Bombers momentum and let them pad the lead a little bit, and I think that is ultimately what cost the Argos in this game. McLeod Bethel-Thompson, he actually showed a lot of resiliency in the second half, and that's what you could say about McLeod Bethel-Thompson. I think that is his best trait as a player, is he's very resilient, and we've seen that throughout his football career, but ultimately, I think he just did enough to keep his job for another week. We'll see what happens with that situation going forward, but ultimately, I think that Toronto just hasn't looked too great the first couple of weeks. That defense did tighten things up in the second half, which was a good sign. And then on the Winnipeg front, I think they really, really need to start playing more consistently on offense. They just haven't been able to get a consistent ground game going this season, and I think that is a huge factor in why their offense has struggled. And, I don't think it's just Andrew Harris. I think it's losing those interior guys. Michael Couture and Drew Jarley along that offensive line have been huge losses in terms of, producing that power running game, getting those 5-6 yards of carry that they were used to getting. So a lot has been put on Zach Collaros, and I think Collaros is actually playing outstanding given what they are giving him around him. So I think that Collaros is really, improvising a lot on plays and buying time and using that ability to make plays for this offense that otherwise wouldn't be there. So I think Winnipeg needs to wake up a little bit offensively, but this defense is still pretty outstanding. Obviously, in the second half, they give up the would-be tying touchdown, but overall, I think the Bombers have played very well so far this season on defense, and I think the offense needs to match that level if they're going to beat BC next weekend. But overall, those are just my takeaways from week 4 of the 2022 CFL season. Once again, I'm sorry for getting this out a little bit later than I usually would. I think the Monday game also kind of screwed me up in addition to me being sick, so we'll see how it goes going forward, guys. I'll try to be more consistent with it. But with that said, hope everyone enjoyed the video. Be sure to hit like and subscribe if you could. And with that said, hope everyone has a great day, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.